to the Simpleton Podcast, the most popular podcast in eternity. Welcome, Laura Hehman. How are you?
Good, Clark Massey. How are you?
So, for a long time now in eternity, we've been the most popular podcast with the communion of saints.
A long time.
A long time now. I have noticed, though, that according to the YouTube algorithm, a few people from down under are now listening. Think they're doing
Australia?
No, the eternal down under. I believe they're doing opposition research by listening to our podcast. Oh, no, but we are still getting only positive feedback, or mostly only positive. Whatever. I don't know. Please give us feedback. I've got a phone number for our new call-in line. Our new call-in line is, for the Simpleton Podcast, 913-390-3672. Feel free to leave ideas, suggestions, and opinions. All right, Laura, today we have some sponsorships and recommendations. We have some feedback from listeners, and we have an interesting guy who's recently come out of hiding that Laura and I want to talk about. He did a long form interview with a notable Catholic, and it's kind of interesting. And then we have some news. Anything you want to add to that?
No, I think we have a couple recommendations. That's all.
All right. Let's start with the recommendations.
As we like
sponsors, yeah. We are now sponsoring the Be an Interplanetary Spy books. All right, backstory on this. When I was a kid in the 80s or early 90s, I got a couple of these books that were called Be an Interplanetary Spy. And the book idea is that you are given logic puzzles throughout the book that you have to solve in this like sci-fi novel, and you have to turn to whichever page depending on which you think the answer to the puzzle is, and to choose your own adventure. So you either meet your demise or you succeed to the next part of the book, right? So but
it's choose your own adventure, but you have to work out the puzzle.
Right. It's not part of the choose your own adventure franchise. It's called Be an Interplanetary Spy. Okay. So I was looking for this because I thought I wanted to introduce it to my kids, and these books are like insanely expensive. Like it was like, no one's ever heard of them. I couldn't even remember the name when I started my search. And, but they're like $20+ to get a decent copy of these old, paperback books. And, then I found that a man came to the rescue who, owns a company called Brick Tower Publishing. So he brought them back into, publication. And his email is bricktower, BRICKTOWER @AOL.com. He is the publisher, and therefore he will sell them to you at half price if you buy them directly through him.
Cool.
Right. So there's like 12 of the Be an Interplanetary Spy books. If you get the whole set, I think they're like $12 a piece, full price. So they're like $6 a piece, not full price.
Okay.
And you can kind of like give them to your kids, like a few at Christmas, a few on their birthday, etc. And my kids have loved them. They've been passed them around to cousins and friends.
That is awesome. Do you know what else he publishes? I'm curious about that.
That's what I was just about ready to bring up, Laura. He also brought another series back from the same time frame called the Time Machine series. That is not my cup of tea, but it must have a fan base for it to have come back in print. So you might want to look at that too.
Yeah. There's like a lot of old Catholic classics that now get published by these like little self-publishers that have horrible typesetting, etc. And it's hard to find those books like in a good publishing.
Well, some of these Catholic publishers don't even typeset. Like Tan Books would like Xerox something that's like in public domain. Like literally you'd be reading a Xerox of an 1800s book and they'd republish it as Tan Books.
Wow. Well, Tan Books is better than
some of them.
And a lot of these like Amazon, whatever, they're unreadable. I haven't found a Tan book that I felt like was unreadable, but yeah, anyway, I have a book recommendation.
Go ahead.
I just found this Substack that I think is called Gathering Light, and she has like a pre-Tolkien reading list for your kids that you want to like get ready to like be able to like take in, the Lord of the Rings, etc. And one of her recommendations that we bought was Dolaire's Book of Trolls. And our listeners might maybe know about Dolaire's Greek myths, which is very popular in a lot of Catholic circles, classical education circles. My kids really have liked that. They use it at school also. But the Book of Trolls, my kids have been eating up, and my kids love going to their grandparents' house because it's like endless TV and video games. And my 6-year-old was not sure if he wanted to go to his grandparents' house because we hadn't finished reading the Book of Trolls.
That's great.
Yeah. Anyway.
I want to give a shout out to Tan Books in a way that one of the best books I've ever read is called like The 32 Doctors of the Church. And it was published about 20 years ago by a Capuchin. And the Capuchin lived in Washington, D.C. So the D.C. Simple House and the Capuchins have been kind of friends over the last few years. And this book's now like completely out of date because there's been new doctors of the church. But it's an excellent book if you get it. It's like got a biography of the doctor of the church, a summary of like their thought and why they were made a doctor of the church and the impact it had. Mm-hmm. And it just goes every single one of them, like from the earliest one all the way to the current. So you get a good church fathers introduction. St. Alphonsus has a great little part in there, you know? But I feel like Cap College there in DC might have a big stack of these that they can't sell anymore because there's now been a couple more doctors of the church declared.
Oh,
so I actually sent our house leader in DC to tell them to go try to get these extra copies, you know, so that the shows could read them. So, yeah. All right. It would deserve a new edition. It was so well done. So, all right. The other thing where you need to talk about as our sponsorship is, for a while now, the podcast has been sponsored by molasses. All right. Came across the most hardcore recipe I've ever seen. If you go to YouTube and look up Fog Crawlers Licorice, you'll see a man making licorice in a cast iron pot, as it should be. And there is so much wood in this licorice between grinding up the star anise and the licorice root and everything like that. He has to strain the wood out of the licorice. And there is no sweetener in this licorice except for blackstrap molasses. I am still trying to track down the ingredients to this. I think this probably should be illegal, or at least a controlled substance, because it's essentially hormone therapy.
A few years ago, a doctor told me to take like a licorice supplement because I was having low blood pressure problems that was contributing to my migraines. And I was told to take licorice to help my blood pressure go up. And I looked it up, and there's like a construction worker that died from eating too much licorice, and his blood pressure went.
Yeah, licorice is like a mild poison or something, but that's why it's kind of like the right thing, you know? It's like, if you do this like Fog Crawlers licorice, I'm pretty sure it's going to put hair on the chest of toddlers. Like, it has to be kept away from people, you know?
It's disgusting. Licorice is disgusting.
We're not talking about Twizzlers, Laura. We're talking about real hardcore black licorice. And I think I've been kind of watching some documentaries on it. It appears to me that at the turn of the century, meaning the 1900 turn of the century, the original turn of the century, that about half the candy market was licorice. You know, it was like honey, a little bit of gum, some spearmint, and chocolate and licorice. That was like what candy was back then.
Yeah.
And licorice seems to have like had the worst. It's kind of like black coffee. Like, it's like, if you drink black coffee, you're just like objectively a better person than other people, and people can't handle it, so they won't drink black coffee. That's what black licorice is like.
You know, I have this like idea about like coffee and wine and tea and these sort of finer things in life that people are supposed to enjoy. It's like the more it tastes like earth.
That's right. That's right. And black licorice is in there, man. If it just tastes like something you chewed on out in the wilderness.
I'm not refined enough to have trained my palate for licorice, but
I wonder if it would be too poisonous to just chew on licorice root. Like, I don't want to die due to this interest. Anyway.
My guess is no. We'll find out. Give it a try, Clark.
Yes. Needs to come with a warning label. All right. Fog Crawlers Black Licorice Recipe, YouTube. All right. We got some good listener feedback, including this listener sent us a nice molasses recipe.
An oat muffin recipe.
Right. I think what this listener was getting at that I thought was a really interesting idea is we had talked about kind of this wolf in sheep's clothing. It's like if someone who's really crooked from the outset found something that it's objectively should be shut down, you know? And their point was it's kind of clear to point out what bad fruit is. Like we kind of like if you're doing these objective sins, it's bad fruit, right? It's harder to define what good fruit is. And some of these places are being kept open due to this hard to define good fruit. Mm-hmm. Is that your take on it?
I mean, yes. And I think that that would have been one of my objections. And I think, there's like some religious orders and different groups here in the DC area doing ministry with Hispanic people or like in concentrated Black neighborhoods that the diocese is not otherwise doing very well. And so I guess that's two objections. One is a need. And then in some cases that it seems like their ministry is very much alive. So I think, though, that this judging of bad fruit should be fairly obvious, like we said, right? And I think that's enough to, like, as we argued as I was arguing, at least in that podcast, that we should just shut down these groups that had too much bad fruit in the beginning, too much sin, But the thing is, it's like at Simple House, we're often asked to like describe what we do and what is Simple House all about. And it's a very difficult thing to do. Mm-hmm. It's like hard to put it in a couple sentences in a way that gives any real meaning to it. I can say objectively what we do, but I don't feel like the person understood the character of it if I say it, Right.
I tell people when they talk about Simple House, do not give the brochure material. Don't give like 2 paragraphs of general data. Yeah. You have to give a story and they'll either get it or they don't, And I was at a Montessori event, and I realized that Montessori has that same character that like it's really, you can't just tell people in a couple sentences the definition of Montessori method. They won't get it, Yeah,
you have to see it being done.
And you almost have to see it like over a couple months, actually, You have to like see it evolve and kind of like live and do,
Yeah, and even like seasoned Montessori teachers continue to go to Montessori trainings.
Right. Yeah. And I've always felt that it was a critique of Simple House that we couldn't kind of put on paper exactly what, like powerfully what we do. And then I realized that Montessori has the same problem. And then I noticed that many things that bear good fruit do. Like even like, why do you love your parish? Or why, or what's special about a marriage or a family or whatever, or even a saint, can you sum up a saint in a few sentences? And I started to wonder if all things that are really good, they're simple, but they also have this kind of like beautiful complexity that you can't like a really beautiful piece of art. You can't just like in a few sentences sum it up.
Yeah. I think that's a great observation. And I think 2 things come to mind. One is the Missionaries of Charity would tell us, they get moved a lot and they would say, like, don't expect to see your good fruit, and that was a little bit of a you want to see it. You want the gratification. But I think part of it is like because you can't know how this is unfolding and when and all that, and I think we have been blessed to see like some good outcomes at a Simple House, things that we help people work on. But there's a lot that it's just like you are not this person. You're not between this person and God and how their thing is unfolding, And I think that was a helpful thing. When I think about some of these like orders that we were talking about, they had like all these like very simple black and white good fruit that they would brag about all the time, and maybe the quieter order in the background doesn't have the like, 50 new vocations in the last year or whatever.
So the problem with judging good fruit is 1, it's often subjective, and 2, when you do look at something and you see like a truly good thing, it's almost unmeasurable and unexplainable. Like there's some like intuitive like grasping of it that you need to have.
Yeah.
Right. And that also makes it kind of a bad reason to me, that also kind of makes it, I believe that the founders of these orders, when they were predators and when they were wolves in sheep clothing, have a forever effect on things they set up, Yeah. And I don't think the good fruit argument's a very powerful argument, almost because of the problems I just said.
Yeah.
It's too easy to kind of weasel around with it. But anyway, it's an interesting reflection that the reader brought up, that it's so hard to even put your hands on what is the good fruit. I certainly would not say vocations is good fruit. Cults can be incredibly successful with vocations. Mm-hmm. That's not good fruit.
Yeah, I think that a lot of things can produce things that look like good fruit, and cults, for instance. And I don't know why this is coming to mind. A few years ago, there was this big celebrity Christian church that, everyone and the Biebers were going to, and the pastor was totally corrupt, and but there are things that, you were getting people going to church every Sunday. I don't know. There were things that looked like good fruit. And I think what the feedback was saying, it was like, she said she doesn't even feel like she can say what good fruit is anymore. And I don't know. There's a lot of things that can kind of produce the good fruit that looks good,
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. And
there's a lot of fruit that looks good at the grocery store that does not taste good.
That's true. In fact, that's the whole idea of a wolf in sheep's clothing, is that it's a deceiving appearance. So, all right. There is an interesting dude. I've known about this dude for I'd say 5-6 years, because I went down a few internet rabbit holes, just kind of Googling, and I just came across him. His name is Christopher Langan. He doesn't come out of the woodwork very much. He recently did a big long form interview with Michael Knowles. Now, the reason why people like interviewing Christopher Langan is kind of odd. It might be a shallow reason, but he has the highest tested IQ ever. It's over 200. But my understanding is IQ tests lose accuracy after about 160. So take it for what you will,
I think he even was like, the IQ test.
So he's an interesting character. So this is kind of why he's interesting. So he's from Montana. He lived most of his life in New York City and California. He has spent a lot of time lifting weights and being a bouncer at bars. He never went to college. He's quite, Laura and I have disagreed about this a little bit. I would call him quite a disagreeable person.
Maybe he's a little contrarian, but I thought he seemed like a sweet, humble guy.
Well, his stories are kind of...
I would like to have breakfast at his house with him and his wife. I don't know what his wife is like, but...
I would too. That would be fascinating. Yeah. But he kind of felt like a math professor talked down to him one time, so he quit going to college, or... He's kind of a guy who worked as a bouncer, and even now he currently lives in rural Missouri on a horse farm on a couple hundred acres with horses, probably pretty close to Conception Abbey, if you know where that is. I think it's in one of the top counties. It'll be on the northern counties of Missouri where he lives. And he's just decided to live away from things, and
he thinks work is very valuable and meaningful, like work is full of meaning.
And he would rather be around farmers and common people than anyone else.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he says early on in his life, he decided that meaning is what was going to drive him, not money, not status, whatever. But what I kind of mean by disagreeable is whenever you listen to him long enough, he'll start going off on people who do have status or money or what. And he's real he feels the need to tear them all down,
Yeah.
So he met his wife. These are all background information. We haven't even gotten to the meat of the conversation yet, but he met his wife in a high IQ club, in California. And she's a Einstein level IQ, a 160. And she's the one who said, hey, we're going to move to Missouri and buy a bunch of horses, Oh. So he also had some funny things I wish we would have said this at the beginning, but being smart and being virtuous are not very correlated. You know, he says that these high IQ clubs get together and they say they want to like get a bunch of smart people in the room so they can work on the important problems of humanity. But he goes, but they all just degenerate into one-upping each other and flirting.
Curious about that, because being smart and having good social skills aren't always correlated
either. Yeah. In fact, there appears to be no correlation between that. Yeah.
Sometimes some might argue there's a negative correlation, but
Christopher's like big kind of gift to the world, or like his big work that he puts out there. So he's completely like unschooled, you know, like he is a completely self-educated person. He calls it the CTMU project.
I think he calls it CatMu.
I don't know why he calls it that, because it stands for Cognitive Theoretic Model of the Universe. Apparently, I was subscribed to the CTMU YouTube channel, and that's why this interview came to our attention. But it also is on Michael Knoll's own channel. So the CTMU, Laura and I are not trying to deeply understand it, but just to give you a sense of what it is, it appears like, I describe it as physics is always looking for unified field theory. It's kind of like unified field theory meets Thomas Aquinas. It seems to me that what he's saying is that I want to unify an understanding of the universe. Unified field theory doesn't quite reach far enough to do that. They're also waving their hands about limits and different mathematical expressions, and they're not dealing with like the cause of causes. They're not dealing with that which like would generatively create the universe. And then he kind of ends up in this like, so coming from kind of like a math physics area, he ends up in an area where he's dealing with the same questions Thomas Aquinas would deal with, right? And he's come to a lot of the same conclusions. How would you change what I just said, Laura?
You might understand it more deeply, but I took it as, well, he saw like, you know, like the physicist approach and the philosophy approach and the mathematician's approach as all like trying to like kind of describe, and maybe the theologian, you know, they're all trying to describe the same world and the same thing. And I think so. He wanted those things to have he wanted a philosophy that kind of unified all of these, right? But there is something lacking. And I just remember him talking about like language and like math can both like describe, you know, the world. And he believes in there's an objective reality that we can observe and describe.
That's true. And when he's asked and I would say he's actually truly doing a philosophical work, although he's using much more math than a normal philosopher would. And what I mean by a philosophical work, it's like Thomas Aquinas is both a philosopher and a theologian. So a philosopher is not using revelation as an axiom. It's trying to show what we can reason out without relying on revelation, meaning scripture and things from the church, right? Whereas like a theologian be like, well, God created the universe. I don't even have to prove it. It just says so, you know? So he's kind of trying to see how far he can get with just philosophy, right? And he mostly ends up in a Christian place. Mostly, there's some heresies here, but he also is kind of like he believes that all of the world religions are attempting the same project, essentially,
right.
You know?
Right.
So the things he said that I thought were interesting was he believes that there is a God. It's an objective fact, has to be, that God is truth, that there is objective truth, like Laura just said, that you are made in the image or likeness of God or likeness of God, and that this God is personal and he personally made you. He believes that atheists are not actually creating logical arguments against God. He just thinks they're people who hate God. And he also believes that in a way there is either a light that existence continues after death, and that if you're living in consistency with this truth, this generative, you know, power that is God, you're in much better shape when you die than if you don't, you know. Then we get into the more controversial claims, which are kind of interesting too. He thought there was a distinction between Lucifer and Satan.
Mm-hmm.
And to him, Lucifer is like a created being that can exist in the created world, but that there's a deeper evil that is so disordered that it cannot even manifest itself in the created world.
Right.
And it requires you to manifest it. Like the way it influences our reality is it hijacks humans or hijacks creatures, essentially, right? Mm-hmm. And he calls that power Satan. And then he calls the power of evil that is created, that is living amongst us, Lucifer. I thought that was kind of an interesting idea.
Yeah.
That's not quite Christian, but interesting nonetheless.
Yeah. He said himself that it was heretical, but Catholics, we think Satan and Lucifer are one and the same. But there is, you do have to sort of understand, the interplay, the relationship of like the influence of the devil, the influence of your own sinfulness, we believe there are demons lurking about,
I mean, we definitely believe the devil is trying to hijack us.
Yeah, he was definitely like not describing a Catholic worldview, but I do think that, the Catholic worldview has a complex understanding of the evil principalities anyway. But yeah.
So he says he was raised Catholic, at least culturally, had a nun who has an aunt who's a nun or something. And then, but when he worships now, he goes to kind of a country Protestant chapel, the way he worships, I thought that was interesting. It seems to me like he's kind of against sophistication and putting on airs. To the point
almost that it's a chip.
That's right. Chip. It's a chip. Yeah. So it's almost to the point that like he wouldn't acknowledge anything good coming from anyone who's sophisticated or puts on an air, which means like when he's asked to recommend books, he's like, I'm sure there's some modern author somewhere writing something worthwhile. I have no idea who, but like, how about Plato and Aristotle? Good sir, which is pretty wild. Pretty great. So interesting guy. He gets into his political views a little bit. He basically has the same political views as Elon Musk, while in other podcasts, he greatly dislikes Elon Musk. So, but they seem to arrive at the same political opinions. I think what's interesting is if you kind of mess around with this podcast, like if you listen to a couple, there's always this weird thing where like the intelligence difference between him and the interviewer is like always like on the table and like always being discussed early on in the interview. Mm-hmm. And there's this thing in kind of like podcast world, and I have no idea if it's true, but it says that like if IQ levels are too different, like only like 15 or 20 points different, an average IQ, by the way, is 100. So this guy's above 200. So it's more than 20 points difference than average. That you actually lose sympathy with each other. Like you don't have a sympathetic understanding of each other. There's something else batting around podcast world about people who have internal dialogues and people who don't. Like it's not the majority of people who are like talking to themselves in their head all the time. Mm-hmm. And it's hard for someone who does have an internal dialogue to kind of understand how someone operates if they don't.
Yeah.
But I've known successful people who like can't picture anything in their head.
I'm the internal dialogue thing I'm confused by right now because there's also a visualization thing related to it. Okay. But like I can visualize an apple on the table that's not on the table, but I don't think in words.
Right. So that's interesting. So you're not someone who has that internal verbal dialogue.
Right. And Ryan is. Yeah.
And I do know other people who cannot visualize the apple on the table, but they're like engineers.
Right. So I don't even know how that's possible, but
I don't either. Yeah. It's hard to figure out. Right. So there seems to be like cognitive diversity, to the point that we have a hard time like figuring out how other people's brains work, Yeah. And that's always an issue when someone interviews Christopher Langan, and he does his best. Like he doesn't ever he's never dismissive. I've never seen him be dismissive of the podcaster who's trying to interview him, Yeah. And I said at the beginning that he's like in hiding. I actually don't think he's in hiding at all. I think he's been trying to get the CTMU model out, but no one cares. So it's as if he's in hiding. He's just like, no one cares about what he's saying.
I actually was, I was impressed by Michael Knowles' ability to keep up with him, but a couple of times they had to stop and be like, what are you saying?
There's a weird interview of Christopher Langan. It's only like 15 minutes by Spike Jonze, the famous director.
Yeah, interesting. Oh, I want to say something, a discrepancy of people's minds that I've noticed on podcasts, that sometimes you'll get a very learned person on a podcast, and there will be a very wise person, less intelligent or whatever. And it's very interesting to see that discrepancy play out.
When you were introducing that idea, I was thinking about how I've seen podcasts where it's like one person's the expert and one person's kind of like a foil. They just ask questions to the expert and they just like receive from the expert. And when I see Christopher Langan interviewed, it's never like that. He's actually trying to have a real conversation with the other person and like kind of get what they're asking and give them a real answer. You know what I mean? Yeah. And honor that they have a valid viewpoint, which is probably why he's still hanging out with common people and not some, like an ivory tower, you know? He's not an elitist at all. He's like an anti-elitist. The other thing is, though, he might be one of the only other men in America trying to bring plaid back.
The real reason, there's two real reasons why we're talking about Christopher Langan today. Plaid and...
He interrupted the interview to eat black licorice. And he kind of wears plaid in all of his interviews, by the way. So anyway, I'm also a guy who lives in Missouri, wears plaid and eats black licorice.
And I am not, so take what you will from those little facts.
All right. I hope everyone found that interesting. I actually don't think most people would find listening. I think it's interesting this guy exists, and his thought. I've not done a deep dive or read a book by him or anything. His thought could be interesting. I would like to hear people who are like Aquinas scholars. Like,
I think I thought it was interesting to listen to. And I think the thing that is interesting is that in a way, I feel like we kind of take the project of categorizing the world as like a done project. And he's trying to do this, you know, of like describe and put in categories and distinguish and all this.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to talk about him because I find the fact that he exists interesting. That there's this kind of anti-elitist, super smart guy who lives in a rural setting, coming up with a theory of everything. Like, that's just interesting to me. And it's also interesting he's never become popular. You know?
Yeah.
He does say that that young men sometimes arrive on his doorstep and they want to talk to him about the CTMU. And he's like, how did you even get here? Like, he doesn't give out his address, but they like reason out where he must live, you know, based on the hints he gives. So, and he says he likes these guys. Like, instead of thinking they're weirdo stalkers, he's like, yeah, and I have more in common with them than anyone else.
Yeah.
All right, let's do the news. The news is strange. I've got one thing that's actually historical news that I just stumbled across in the last week. Ukraine. All right. The fighting in Ukraine continues. The two things that are really notable are that there are now North Korean troops on the ground on the side of Russia, and they're dying in battle. And it appears that North Korea is being paid in rice, in land that Russia may cede a little bit of land to North Korea on the border.
Wow.
And North Korea might be in collaborations with weapons technology. That's pretty important because Russia has ICBMs. Korea already has a nuclear bomb, but they don't necessarily have the delivering capacity to get it to the U.S. And now that these two militaries are literally fighting shoulder to shoulder, it seems trivial that could get transferred.
Yeah.
All right. The other thing is Iran now has boots on the ground in Ukraine, also on the side of Russia, too. It's not clear that they're frontline troops, but it appears that the Republican Guard has people there. So that is, the world is getting crazier and more chaotic all the time. All right. The historical news that's kind of wild is Vietnam. Okay. We've had a lot of people who are Vietnamese come through a Simple House over the years, and all of them kind of suffered at some level at the hands of the Communist Party of Vietnam, including one guy who was particularly interesting. He was a Carmelite seminarian, and he was delightful. He used to force us to sing hymns. He'd be like, and now we have prayed, we will sing a hymn. And he would just turn to a page and tell everyone to turn to that page and start singing.
Yeah. And
he was going to an underground seminary in Vietnam. And he told me that his dad, after the war, after the U.S. pulled out of Vietnam, was sent to re-education camps. His family had to like walk into the jungle and just clear land and start. Apparently they rebuilt the family by, he called it eating monkeys and snakes. Like that's what they ate for years, he said. And they would have chicken on Christmas. So anyway, there's just been great suffering. They rebuilt the family by growing black pepper as an export good, you know? So anyway, Catholics have suffered greatly at the hands of the North Vietnamese. So what I'm going to say, though, I don't want to make the Vietnamese Communist Party look too good, but it's kind of wild, some stuff I found out. So before the U.S. went into the Vietnam War, Vietnam had been a French colony, and there was a war between France and the Vietnamese. And when the U.S. came in, we were essentially taking over a battle that the French were leaving. And so the Vietnamese had already been through a full war by the time the U.S. arrived. And after the U.S. leaves in defeat, I don't think there's any other way to categorize that, but we leave, and the evacuation of our allies and stuff is a great tragedy in American history that happened at the end of the Vietnam War. Everyone wishes it could have been done better. And the thing I learned, though, was a couple years after the U.S. left, Pol Pot has got the Khmer Rouge, I believe was the name of the regime, in Cambodia, and he's literally killed 1 in 4 Cambodians. It's probably in modern history, the greatest victimization genocide of your own population. Yeah. He was communist, and he was being supported by the Chinese. And Vietnam is like, we don't like this idea that the Chinese are controlling a Southeast Asian country, and clearly killing a quarter of your people is not any good either. Vietnam invaded Cambodia like 2 years after the U.S. left Vietnam, took over Cambodia, waited until a truly Cambodian regime could arise to replace Pol Pot, and then left.
And that's crazy.
And then it gets crazier. China is so mad that Vietnam has like taken out their ally Pol Pot. They launch a major invasion of Vietnam in the 80s. And Vietnam repels the Chinese invasion. So in the span of about 25 years, they had fought a war with France, the U.S., Cambodia, and China. I had no idea that all happened.
Yeah.
And that's the news for the week. Now you know Vietnamese history.
All of it.
All of it.
Well, one other bit of news.
Yes. All right. This is our first post-election podcast.
Yeah.
And what happened during the election?
Trump won decisively.
Most notably, someone won.
Somebody won.
We were worried in our last podcast that no one would win the election.
Yes, and I was seeing a lot of people online worried about there not being a clear outcome of the election and doing different scenarios that they could imagine, you know. And there were no hanging chads or anything like that, and it was decided fairly quickly. So that's a relief, separate from the outcome, which people may have different feelings about. I find that a relief.
And I think regardless of who you supported in this presidential election, there's some stuff coming out now from like Trump's headquarters or whatever that people should be paying attention to. And I'm not seeing it covered like adequately in the press. It's kind of mostly being ignored. And he keeps putting out these 5 to 10 minute position statements where it's just Trump. There's some editing in here. So it's just Trump, just like, boom, like bam, 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 bam,
this
bam.
This is our plan for. Yeah.
Right. And the position statements I've seen, I'm not even sure I've seen all of them, he did one on freedom of speech, that he's basically going to take care of the problems that were exposed in the Twitter files and that Facebook has complained about people in the federal government biasing social media, having portals into social media, deleting their texts and emails, so that we don't know exactly what all they've done. And he's going to shut all that down, fire everyone. He says everything needs to be said. He says he will, because I'm not sure he can do everything he wants to do, but he says he wants to shut all that down, fire the people involved, and create a digital Bill of Rights. And that you, if you're over 18, should have a right to a simple algorithmic feed that's unbiased by whatever the social media company is.
I don't know how to achieve that, but I think if it's at least free from government manipulation is a pretty good start.
I think that I always grew up thinking freedom of speech was important because it's just so obnoxious to tell someone what they can and can't say, and to try to control speech just feels so obnoxious. But now I feel like freedom of speech is important because I think that, we as a society and as even our worldview, not just government issues, but even our worldview is kind of at like critical points and change points. And I think freedom of speech is the only way we actually healthily come to a better position and not regress. I think we need that. So I'm kind of,
and I think the idea of a digital Bill of Rights, I don't know what all it will cover, but it seems like, how do we not have this already? Because it is this kind of big sphere that I think people are worried about their privacy and et cetera. So,
and on like a bad note, like we've always been trying to get our podcast persecuted so that we can become insanely popular. Or trying to get canceled. And if this goes through, our chance of getting canceled will go away. But there's this other issue that I have been banned for life from X, and I have to exist on X under a pseudonym. So this could lift my lifetime ban. In case people don't know, I'm banned because my account was hacked while I neglected it for a decade. And my fake Clark started supporting a bunch of cryptocurrencies.
Sure.
Yeah, that's
like
right.
Hot cryptocurrency babes.
Yeah, I've appealed, and X does not believe I was not the cryptocurrency weirdo. So there you
go. So you pointed out earlier to me that one thing that was interesting to you about this is he saved his kind of big ideas until after the election.
That is the important part. Yeah. Yes. Like the reason why this is more significant than anything I've ever seen is that you always see crazy ideas to get elected. And then they go, maybe I'm not actually going to do that.
Right.
Like I was going to give healthcare to everyone. Well, maybe now it's just not reasonable. Or I'm going to pull out of all these wars. No, maybe there is a good reason to be in these wars, But then this is like he got elected and now the wildest stuff's coming out. Right.
Yeah.
So one's the internet freedom of speech. The next one is cut welfare benefits to people who are not in the country legally.
Get rid of a federal Department of Education and give that back to the states.
Basically give parents more control over education and states more control over education. The Department of Education, regardless of whether or not, I'm not going to say whether or not this is right or wrong, but it didn't exist until about 1979 under Carter. And I remember in the 90s, people were talking about getting rid of it. So it's not quite as new and crazy an idea as it sounds. Like people have been seriously wondering whether or not we should have it for a minute. Then he's also sent out a memo that they're going to do the Department of Governmental Efficiency. Okay. And that Elon Musk and Ramaswamy will be in charge of the Department of Government Efficiency. And the inside joke here is that when Bitcoin was really exploding in popularity, Elon Musk said Bitcoin is not a great solution because it's too energy consumptive, to process and create Bitcoin. Therefore, he supported an alternative cryptocurrency called, he's the one who needs banned from X, not me. He supported a cryptocurrency called Doge, DOGE. Which is kind of a joke currency that has a dog head, it was named after somebody's pet dog. So Elon has been supporting the Doge currency, and now the new administration he's going to be helping manage is named Doge. So the internet is getting a lot of glee out of this. Yeah. And then the other thing is he's appointed the new DOD head is a guy who wrote a book about dismantling the VA system. And he really doesn't want to take away. He wants veterans to have health care. He just doesn't see a need for veterans to go to the VA system for like diabetes. He thinks that veteran health care from the government should be limited to only things that veterans kind of suffer
like
acutely.
Or injuries, etc.
Or PTSD. Or I think like if you like have, a leg problem that could be just as well treated at your local hospital, you should just go there and have the government pay for it, as opposed to have to travel sometimes hundreds of miles to a VA hospital. Mm-hmm. So this is pretty significant because there's going to be a lot of jobs. If they achieve any of this, the amount of government and reorganization and job loss would be enormous. Vivek was being kind of teased whether or not he meant they might cut 15 to 30% of the federal jobs. And he said maybe 80. Yeah. And he said it seriously, even though I don't know that that's possible, but he was serious. And that's what Elon did at Twitter. He cut 80%. Yeah. And Elon is famous for saying, if you don't need to hire 10% of what you cut, you didn't cut enough.
Oh, wow.
So they're pretty serious about it. Whether or not they can do it will be interesting. Yeah. But just to give you guys a scale, like the VA system is an over $400 billion a year enterprise. That's like 10% of all the tax revenue. So that's a very big chunk. I mean, the only thing bigger as a single program is the Department of Defense itself, which is like 20%. That doesn't count the CIA or anything, because I think they all need lumped in as military. Yeah. But yeah. So that's all, get that on your radar. Who knows if they can actually do it? Trump did none of this in his first term. So. Right.
If they do, even some of that, it's a big impact on DC.
Right. I know the DC community is going to have a lot of turmoil and change. Oh, but no, one other thing though, both Vivek and Elon have mentioned that if they eliminate positions, they have to give a positive off-ramp. And Vivek actually put a number to it. He said, I imagine we would give 1 year salary or 1.5 year salary. And he says that's better than anyone in the private sector gets. Okay. But essentially, they would give a generous severance package if they do mass layoffs.
Wow.
But that also means, though, that if you were looking for a benefit to this, like in the federal budget, you won't see the benefit for a year or so. And Vivek's argument has been that if you don't have enough federal employees, then what you'd have them do is just the most important things, right? If you get enough of them, they kind of do all the important things. Yeah. And then if you get too many federal employees, they actually look for things to do and they create whole new structures and things that are counterproductive. Right. So the idea they have is to cut it back to where they believe that if they pay someone not to work, it'll actually improve government. That's their philosophy.
Mm. So, will Clark get back on X?
Right. And next time you see me, my hair will be darker, and it won't be because I dyed it. It'll be because the power of black licorice has purified me.
Yes.
Or they'll find me dead chewing on a licorice root as it poisoned myself. So. All right, Laura, good to see you.
You too.
God bless everyone. Pray for the world. Pray for everything in civilization. Appreciate everyone. Yep. Peace.
All right. See you, Clark.
See ya. Bye.
Bye.